Australia-India Business Council has hailed the Australia-India Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement as a watershed moment in India-Australia bilateral ties. This is the first step towards a comprehensive economic cooperation agreement in 2023. The ECTA benefits several labour-intensive Indian sectors. Exporters in India now enjoy zero duty on 96% of India's exports to Australia. The remaining 1.7% of tariff lines are to be made zero duty over a 5-year period. With us right now is Jodi McKay, the National Chair of the Australia-India Business Council, also a former Cabinet Minister and also a member of the Australian Parliament. She was also the first woman to wear a sari to the Australian Parliament. Thank you very much for joining us, Jodi. We believe that you're someone who works very closely with the Indian diaspora back in Australia.
Yeah.
Give us a sense of how this has been taken by the Indians, by the Indian diaspora, the Indian community back home in Australia, and how did they contribute to this FTA?
Yeah, well, they're obviously very excited about it and they're energised, and I think they now see the importance of their role in this agreement as well. If you look at our diaspora, we have about 1 million Indian Australians, and that's a population of 25 million, so they wield significant power electorally as well. But all of them want this agreement to work, and while they perhaps weren't involved in the lobbying for it, I would strongly suspect that on this side, particularly in the decisions that Prime Minister Modi made, the size of our diaspora, the power of our diaspora certainly played a part in this agreement.
How do you see the trade, especially in the first year since this deal comes into effect? How could the trade between the two countries rise in this calendar year?
Yeah, so the agreement specifies an increase to about $45 billion over the next 5 years. So the trade is currently at $27 billion. But I think, Piyush Goyal wanted it to achieve by 2030 $100 billion. So that's quite ambitious. The question is how that plays out. Now, the framework is there. There's still some negotiation going on now on the CECA agreement, which is the second stage of the free trade agreement. But I think that while the framework is there, it really does require business to now step up and realise the opportunities, which is one of the reasons why we're here in India. We're talking about the free trade agreement, we're talking about the sectors that benefit, and we're talking about the opportunities now between both countries. What we're seeing is enthusiasm and an awareness on the India side. I think we still have some way to go on the Australia side, and that's a job that we have to do, but also a job that the Australian government has to do as well.
Right. I would also like to ask you, what is the level of awareness on both sides when it comes to the benefits arising out of the ECTA?
Yeah, I mean, I think on this side, as I said, I think that if you want to export or you are exporting, then you're aware because Australia has pretty much wiped all its tariffs. Well, it has. It's wiped. So our duties usually sit at about 4 to 5%. They're all gone now. On the India side, we're talking about 70% of tariffs, and India has protected about 30% of its tariffs. It's not necessarily all elimination. We're talking about a reduction, and we're also talking about quotas, tariff quotas. But I think the important thing in all this is that the opportunities now are across a range of sectors, and it's not just tariffs that we're talking about. We are actually talking about agreements under a strategic cooperation agreement that India and Australia have reached, and that includes sectors of mutual interest. It includes mutual recognition of qualifications. It includes how we increase the opportunity for Indian students in Australia. I think they're things that will happen immediately, but this is, Australia we have first mover advantage. The UK and Canada, they're negotiating their agreements now. Australia has a year to make the most of this agreement, and our message is we must seize this, and in Australia businesses have to become aware of what this agreement actually means on this side. It's a little bit more complicated for Australian companies on this side, but I think when you look at all tariffs wiped, 98% right now, and then over the next 3 to 5 years, the remaining 3%, 2 to 3%.
Right. I would also like to speak to you about the growth in mobility, especially in IT services, as a result of this ECTA. What could be the increasing trend that we could see?
Well, I think that the IT sector in particular has been very forceful in the need for us to see mobility between India and Australia increase. So we're going to need between 300,000 and 1.2 million young IT workers in Australia to meet our needs over the next 10 years. The question is how we do that, and naturally we look to India for that to happen. Our immigration system at the moment is difficult. What our government is now doing is looking at how we can marry up our immigration visa system to meet the needs of the ECTA. Now, our concern is how long that will take, but it will require some legislative change. But I think there is a will, there's a knowledge that this has to be done. And the IT sector is huge. I see that as, kind of one of the top 3 sectors of mutual interest in terms of sectors of importance. But the IT sector is important, and certainly as we've been travelling around India, that is the message we're getting. Every single state in India is focused on IT and critical technology. So we need to make sure that while it's not necessarily included as a tariff item, it is included as a sector of significance.
Right. And when it comes to export of goods from Australia to India, what has been the trend that you've seen? Has there been a significant growth in trade since the 29th of December?
Well, most of our trade, unfortunately, into India has been resources-based, primarily coal. So we bring into India about 70% of India's coal needs, mostly black coal. That's important for us because it's worth about $13 billion. The question is, what can we do beyond that? And that is now the discussion that's occurring. For instance, I just witnessed a memorandum of understanding which was signed between an Australian company and 2 Indian companies, and that's in regard to electric vehicles. So this is technology that Australia has, but they need the scale here in India. And I think whenever you're talking about startups or you're talking about companies and the opportunities, you have to think about the difference between the 2 countries. We in Australia are a nation of innovation, but we don't have India's scale. India has the scale to be able to make these, these innovations successful. So the opportunity in this agreement is significant, but we do need both sides aware. We are, can I just say, we're seeing a real will from the national government here. I would like to see more from the state governments.
You mentioned an important point that Australian businesses want a greater access for agricultural goods, considering the thriving agriculture industry back in Australia. Would that be your hope from the CECA talks now?
Yeah, look, it would. I would hope that, but I think that possibly many of the gains on agriculture have come under this. I think they've probably maybe pushed it as far as they can. So from the Australia side, for instance, India wants our wool and our sheep. Seafood. Seafood is a big one for India. So we've got lobsters straight away coming in here, but we've got other fresh and processed seafood. So I think that's probably, my sense is that there won't be anything further on agriculture. I could be wrong. But what this CECA agreement, which we're hoping will be finalised by mid-year, it'll focus on the services sector again. This current agreement touched on some of that, but there is still a lot to be done. And I think it will kind of clean up some of the other areas that, have been touched on but haven't followed through on exactly what business
If you can give us a sense of some of the areas that need to be cleaned up or addressing when it comes to the services trade, and what could the CECA do?
Look, I think on our side it's our visa system. If you think about what we need to do on that side, it's on the visa side. So services, when I talk about services, you're talking about how we bring young people in to look at how we meet the needs of our IT sector. If you talk about the pharmaceutical sector, we're going to fast-track some of those FDA-approved medicines coming into Australia. So I think that, there's a need for us to drill down into some of the manufacturing parts of this, I think. This deals with critical resources, but what are the, how is that actually used in some of the component manufacturing? Both countries have a Make in India, Make in Australia. How does that then play out between the 2 countries? So I think you're going to see government procurement. I think that's a big one that's going to be looked at. So there's a range of issues that they've set aside, but the conversations we're having are also about, well, this is what is on the table. What else would you like to see?
All right, Jodie McKay, thank you very much for joining us here with your view on the India-Australia ECTA and what the CECA could have in store for businesses both in Australia and India. Thank you once again for being with us.
Thank you.